Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The opulent living room of the Curtis Ashford estate, a space usually reserved for high-stakes business meetings or lavish, impersonal parties, had become an unlikely war room for a family in quiet crisis. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, dramatic shadows across the polished marble floor. It was a golden, forgiving light, but it did nothing to soften the harsh lines of worry on Curtis Ashford's face. He stood by the window, a crystal tumbler of amber whiskey clutched in his hand, not drinking, just holding it as if its solid weight could anchor him to a reality that was rapidly disintegrating. Portia Robinson, his wife, sat on the edge of a velvet settee, her posture unnaturally rigid. She was a vision, as always, her stylish clothes and carefully applied makeup a fragile shield against the turmoil within. But the shield was cracking. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, trembled slightly. The silence between them was a living entity, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the faint, rhythmic clink of ice against glass as Curtis finally took a slow sip. He had known something was wrong for weeks. The distance, the evasive answers, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. Portia had always been a fortress of strength and faith, her belief in their future unshakable even during the most tumultuous times. But lately, the fortress walls had shown signs of a siege from within. He had attributed it to the lingering trauma of her kidnapping, the pressure of being a public figure's wife, or perhaps the subtle but persistent tensions with his children, Drew and Trina. He had been prepared for any of those battles. He was armed and ready to be her protector, her champion. He was not prepared for this. "You've been quiet all day, Portia," Curtis said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the spacious room. He didn't turn from the window, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the manicured lawns. "Quiet for weeks, if I'm being honest. I'm your husband. I can't help you if you don't tell me what's weighing on your soul." Portia flinched, the words "your husband" striking her with the force of a physical blow. She drew a shaky breath, the air tasting thin and insufficient. "Curtis, there are things, it's complicated." "Complicated?" He finally turned, his dark eyes pinning her in place. They were the eyes of a businessman who had built an empire from nothing, a man accustomed to assessing truths and lies with unnerving accuracy. "Our life has always been complicated. Complicated I can handle. It's the silence I can't stand. It's the feeling that you're a million miles away from me, even when you're right here." He set his glass down on a side table with a definitive click. "Talk to me." The command was gentle but absolute. It was the tone he used when he knew a deal was about to close, when there was no more room for negotiation. Portia felt the last of her resolve crumble. The secret, a corrosive acid she had been carrying inside for too long, was demanding release. She could no longer contain it, the pressure was splitting her in two. Her eyes welled with tears she had been stubbornly holding back. She looked down at her hands, at the wedding band that felt suddenly like a brand. I'm pregnant, Curtis." The words hung in the air, suspended for a moment that stretched into an eternity. Curtis's stern expression dissolved into one of pure, unadulterated shock. His brows furrowed, his mind racing through calculations, through timelines, through possibilities. The anger and suspicion that had been brewing were momentarily washed away by a tidal wave of stunned confusion. "Pregnant," he repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. He took a step toward her, his head cocked. "But, how? We've been careful. And with everything you've been through," his voice trailed off as he saw the profound anguish on her face. This was not the joyful announcement of a wife sharing blessed news with her husband. This was a confession. The air in the room shifted, growing colder, denser. The golden light now felt accusatory. A cold dread began to uncoil in the pit of Curtis's stomach. His eyes narrowed, the businessman's instincts roaring back to life. He was no longer looking at his grieving wife, he was looking at a subject from whom he needed to extract a painful truth. "Portia," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "How far along are you?" She squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear tracing a path through her makeup. "The doctor said, about 10 weeks. 10 weeks. Curtis's mind became a calendar, flipping back through the pages of recent history. 10 weeks ago, he had been immersed in the chaos of his club, dealing with a supplier dispute. Portia had been, where had she been? A deep, chilling freeze began to spread through his veins as a specific, horrifying memory surfaced. 10 weeks ago. The time of the kidnapping. The time she had been taken, held against her will by that monster, Simon. The color drained from Curtis's face. A violent, nauseating wave of protectiveness and rage washed over him. The thought of that man touching his wife, violating her, and leaving her with this consequence was too monstrous to bear. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. Is it? He couldn't even say the name. Did that animal? Simon, did he do this to you? The question was a guttural whisper, laden with a promise of vengeance. Portia's eyes flew open, wide with a fresh horror. No! Curtis, no! It wasn't him. It wasn't like that. The vehemence in her denial was genuine, but it did nothing to reassure him. It only deepened the mystery and the dread. Then who? Curtis's voice rose, the calm fracturing. If it wasn't him, then who, Portia? Who is the father of my wife's child? He emphasized the words my wife's with a biting sarcasm that made her flinch again. This was the moment. The point of no return. There was no elegant way to say it, no gentle phrasing that could cushion the blow. The truth was a jagged rock, and she had to throw it. She looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw the man she loved, the man who had fought for her, stood by her, and built a life with her. And she was about to shatter that life into a million unrecognizable pieces. Her lips trembled, the words sticking in her throat. She forced them out, each one a painful, separate effort. It's Isaiah's. The room did not simply go quiet, it became a vacuum, sucking all sound, all light, all air out of existence. Curtis stood perfectly still, his body rigid. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He simply stared at her as if she had just spoken in a language he had never heard before. Isaiah. Isaiah Temple. The man who had been his rival, his adversary, his enemy for years. The man who had tried to destroy his business, his family, his very life. The man whose own son, Marshall, was Curtis's half-brother, weaving a tangled web of bitterness and betrayal that stretched back decades. Isaiah was more than just another man, he was the embodiment of a feud, a symbol of a long and painful history. And he was the father of the child Portia was carrying. The information seemed to short-circuit Curtis's brain. He could process a pregnancy. He could even process, with unimaginable difficulty, a pregnancy resulting from an assault. But this? This was a betrayal of an entirely different magnitude. This was not an act of violence forced upon her, this was a choice. A conscious, willing choice his wife had made with the one man in the world he despised above all others. The silence stretched, becoming a physical weight pressing down on them both. Portia watched the emotions play across his face like a devastating storm, the initial, uncomprehending shock, the dawning realization, and then, finally, the cataclysmic eruption of betrayal and pain. He took a step back, as if her very presence had become toxic. The love and concern in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a glacial coldness that was more terrifying than any outburst of rage. When he finally spoke, his voice was not a roar, but a whisper of shattered glass. It was flat, devoid of all emotion, and it carried the weight of a final judgment. He looked her dead in the eye, his gaze stripping away every layer of her being, every excuse, every plea for understanding, until only the bare, ugly truth remained. And he delivered the 6 words that would forever cleave their lives into a before and an after. You are no wife of mine. The words landed not like a slap, but like a guillotine. Clean, precise, and utterly final. Portia felt them in her soul, a killing blow to the identity she had held for so long. Wife. Partner. Confidant. In 6 words, he had revoked it all. A broken sob escaped her lips. Curtis, please, let me explain. Explain? He let out a short, harsh bark of laughter that held no humor. Explain what, Portia? Explain how you ended up in bed with Isaiah Temple? Explain how you could betray me, our marriage, everything we've built together, with him? What possible explanation could there be? It was a mistake, she cried, her composure shattering completely. A terrible, horrible, one-time mistake. It was after we had that huge fight about the trust fund for Trina. You were so distant, so consumed with business and your issues with Drew. I felt so alone, Curtis. So invisible. I went to the Metro Court bar, and he was there, and we started talking. Talking? Curtis interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what they're calling it now? You talked yourself into his bed? You talked yourself into carrying his child? He shook his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. Don't insult my intelligence by blaming this on my distance. I have spent my entire life building a legacy, protecting this family, providing for you. And you repay me by spreading your legs for my worst enemy? The crudeness of his words was a deliberate weapon, and it hit its mark. Portia recoiled as if she'd been struck. It wasn't like that. It was a moment of weakness, of stupidity. I had too much to drink, and I was vulnerable, and he was there. It meant nothing. Nothing? Curtis took a menacing step forward, his body trembling with suppressed fury. It meant enough for you to forget your vows. It meant enough for you to come home to my bed, to my house, and lie to my face for weeks. And now, it meant enough to create a child. A living, breathing consequence of your nothing. He spat the last word out as if it were poison. I was going to tell you, she pleaded, desperation clawing at her throat. I didn't know how. I was terrified of this, of seeing that look in your eyes. Well, now you see it, he said, his voice returning to that terrifying, flat calm. You looked into the heart of our marriage and you chose to set it on fire. With Isaiah Temple. Of all the people in this godforsaken town, you chose him. He turned away from her, walking back to the window, his back a rigid, unyielding wall. He was shutting her out, brick by brick, and she could feel the finality of it with every fiber of her being. Do you have any idea what you've done? He asked the windowpane, his reflection a ghostly, haunted version of the man she knew. This isn't just about us. This is about Drew and Trina. This is about the business. This is about the entire damn town. Isaiah will use this. He will use this child as a weapon. He will hold it over my head for the rest of my life. You haven't just broken our marriage, Portia. You've handed my enemy the ultimate victory. You've given him a permanent piece of my life, of my family's legacy. A living, breathing Ashford Temple heir, conceived by my own wife. The sheer scale of the betrayal, the strategic implications he was laying out, overwhelmed her. She had been so consumed by her own guilt and fear that she hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. She had only seen the personal catastrophe, not the dynastic one. He doesn't have to know, she whispered, a last, futile attempt at damage control. I could leave town. I could handle this on my own. No one ever has to know. Curtis turned slowly, a look of utter contempt on his face. And what? You think I would let you do that? You think I would allow the wife of Curtis Ashford to disappear, pregnant with another man's child, and have the entire town speculate? Have my children wonder what drove their stepmother away? Have Isaiah, who is no fool, eventually put the pieces together and come looking for what he would see as his? No. The truth always comes out, Portia. It's out now. Between us. And it changes everything. He walked toward the center of the room, his movements stiff, like a man moving through a nightmare. He stopped and picked up his whiskey glass, draining the contents in one long swallow. He placed the empty glass back on the table with a sense of finality. You need to leave, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Curtis, please, this is my home, Portia sobbed, her body shaking uncontrollably. Not anymore, he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. I cannot look at you right now. I cannot be in the same room with you. I need you to pack a bag and go. Go to a hotel. Go to your mother's. I don't care. But you will leave this house. Where will I go? She asked, her voice small and broken. That is no longer my concern, he replied, the words icy and precise. You made your choices. You made your bed, as they say. Now you get to lie in it. Alone. He walked to the door of the study, pausing with his hand on the knob. He didn't look back at her. I will have my lawyer contact you, he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Regarding the divorce. And with that, he opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind him. The gentle click of the latch was louder than any slam could have been. It was the sound of a life ending. Portia sat alone in the opulent, silent room, the golden light of the setting sun now feeling mocking and cruel. She wrapped her arms around herself, a wave of nausea and vertigo washing over her. She was pregnant. She was homeless. And she was, according to the only man she had ever truly loved, no wife of his. The 6 words echoed in the silence, a relentless, painful mantra. You are no wife of mine. They were not just a rejection of her action, they were a revocation of her identity. He had not just ended their marriage, he had erased it, declaring it null and void in his heart. She thought of Isaiah. The brief, reckless encounter that had felt like a desperate grasp for validation in a moment of profound loneliness. He had been charming, attentive, a mirror reflecting back a version of herself that felt desired and seen, a version she felt was fading in her own marriage. It had been a catastrophic error in judgment, a poison pill swallowed in a moment of weakness, and now the poison was coursing through every vein of her life, destroying everything it touched. She thought of the child growing inside her. A life that should have been a blessing, a symbol of love, was now a permanent brand of her infidelity, a ticking time bomb that would forever link the Ashford and Temple families in a web of shame and conflict. This child would never know a united family, would always be a source of pain for Curtis, a point of leverage for Isaiah, and a living reminder of her own failings for Portia herself. The weight of it all crashed down upon her, and she doubled over, great, racking sobs tearing from her chest. She cried for the love she had shattered, for the future she had obliterated, for the innocent life that was now born into a legacy of bitterness. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was just a hollow shell, sitting in the ruins of the life she had chosen to destroy. In the days that followed, the Ashford estate became a mausoleum of what once was. Portia moved out, as instructed, finding a temporary, sterile refuge in a suite at the Metro Court. The news of her sudden departure spread through Port Charles with the swift, silent efficiency of a virus. Whispers followed Curtis wherever he went, but he offered no explanations, his face a stony mask of impenetrable resolve. He threw himself into his work with a ferocious intensity, using the chaos of business to numb the gaping wound in his heart. But in the quiet moments, in the deep silence of the empty house, the 6 words he had spoken echoed back to him. You are no wife of mine. He had meant them in that white-hot moment of betrayal. But the finality of them now left him standing in a vast, empty space, a king in a castle stripped bare of all warmth and light. He thought of Portia's laughter that used to fill these halls. He thought of her unwavering faith in him, her gentle strength that had been his anchor. He had loved her with a depth that had surprised even him. And now, that love felt like a phantom limb, an ache for something that was irretrievably gone, amputated by her actions. His anger at Isaiah was a cold, constant flame. This was the ultimate humiliation, the final move in a long-standing game of chess between them. Curtis knew, with a sickening certainty, that Isaiah would eventually discover the truth. And he would revel in it. The child would become a pawn, a claim on the Ashford legacy, a permanent thorn in Curtis's side. For Portia, the Metro Court suite was a gilded cage of her own making. Every ring of the phone, every knock at the door, sent a jolt of fear through her. Was it Curtis, ready to talk? Was it Isaiah, having somehow found out? Or was it just the press, sniffing around for a story? She was paralyzed by shame and regret, her future a terrifying, blank canvas. She considered her options, each one more bleak than the last. she could have the baby and raise it alone, forever marked as the woman who destroyed her marriage to Curtis Ashford. She could tell Isaiah and face his unpredictable reaction, knowing it would only pour gasoline on the already raging fire between the two families. Or she could make a different, more permanent choice, one that filled her with a deep, moral conflict that warred with her desperation. Weeks turned into a month. The silence from Curtis was absolute. His lawyer had, true to his word, sent over a thick envelope of divorce papers. Seeing the formal, cold language that sought to legally dissolve their union made her physically ill. She couldn't bring herself to sign them. Signing them would make it real, would be the final, administrative stamp on Curtis's 6-word decree. One afternoon, driven by a despair she could no longer contain, she found herself standing outside the gate of the Ashford estate. She didn't have the courage to go to the door. She just stood there, hidden by the foliage, watching the house that had been her home. She saw Curtis emerge, getting into his car. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders set with a weight that hadn't been there before. He didn't look like a victorious man who had cast out a disloyal wife. He looked like a man in profound pain. And in that moment, Portia understood the full, devastating impact of what she had done. Her betrayal hadn't just triggered his anger, it had broken his spirit. She had taken a man of immense pride and strength and had shown him to be a fool in the eyes of his greatest enemy. He drove away, never seeing her. Portia stood there for a long time, the chill of the evening seeping into her bones. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, where the child, Isaiah's child, was growing. The 6 words were now a part of her, etched into her soul as indelibly as the life inside her. They were the title of this new, painful chapter of her life. A chapter of isolation, of consequence, of a love lost not to fate or circumstance, but to a single, unforgivable choice. She had gambled with her happiness and had lost everything. And as she turned and walked away from the home she loved, she knew the painful echo of those words would be her constant companion for the rest of her days. "You are no wife of mine." And in losing that title, she feared she had lost herself completely. Curtis sat in the dim light of the Metro Court's private lounge, the glass of bourbon in his hand untouched. He had been quiet for most of the day, ignoring messages, ignoring the world. His mind was racing, replaying what he had overheard at the hospital earlier that afternoon. Words that shattered his already fragile heart, words that would change everything. Portia was pregnant. And the child wasn't his. The name Isaiah echoed in his head like a curse. He never expected that name to be tied to the woman he loved, to the marriage he fought so hard to save. When the door opened, Portia's soft footsteps echoed across the room. "Curtis," she said quietly, her voice uncertain, trying to gauge his mood. She could sense the tension immediately. His posture, the stiffness in his shoulders, the clenched jaw, it all screamed danger. She approached slowly, her heart thudding. "You've been avoiding me all day. What's going on?" Curtis didn't look at her at first. He stared at the glass in his hand, watching the amber liquid swirl. Finally, he set it down, his eyes meeting hers with a pain so deep it took her breath away. "You really want to know what's going on, Portia?" he asked, his tone calm but laced with something dark and broken. Portia frowned. "Of course I do. You're scaring me, Curtis." He stood up slowly, taking a step closer until they were face to face. "I heard you at the hospital," he said, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay composed. "I heard you talking to Elizabeth. About the baby." Portia's face went pale. "Curtis. Don't," he cut her off sharply, his voice echoing. "Don't lie to me. Not this time." His breathing was shallow, his chest heaving as the truth clawed its way out. "You're pregnant, and it's not mine, is it?" Tears immediately welled up in Portia's eyes. "Curtis, please, just let me explain." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Explain what?" "How you found comfort with another man while your husband was learning to walk again. How you betrayed me when I needed you most." Portia's tears spilled over. "It wasn't like that. Curtis, you pushed me away. You were angry, you were hurting, and I didn't know how to reach you. Isaiah was just someone who listened. It wasn't supposed to happen. Curtis looked at her as if he didn't recognize the woman standing before him. Wasn't supposed to happen, he repeated softly, as though tasting the words. You think that makes it better? He stepped back, his voice breaking. I gave you everything, Portia. I fought for us when I could barely stand on my own 2 feet. I believed in you. Portia reached for him, but he stepped out of her grasp. I never stopped loving you, she whispered desperately. It was a mistake, Curtis. One night. I swear to you, it meant nothing. His eyes glistened, filled with disbelief and sorrow. One night was enough, he said hoarsely. Enough to destroy everything we built. Enough to bring another man's child into our marriage. He paused for a long moment, the silence suffocating. Then, with a raw voice that cut through her heart, he said the 6 words that would haunt her forever. You killed what we had left. Portia's knees almost gave out. She covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably. Don't say that. Please, Curtis, don't. But Curtis couldn't stop. The floodgates had opened, and years of pain and betrayal came pouring out. You think I haven't suffered enough? I lost my ability to walk, my independence, and now I've lost you, too. And for what? For a man who'll never love you like I did? His voice cracked on the last word, and he turned away, running a hand over his face. Curtis, she pleaded, I didn't plan any of this. I was scared, I was lonely, and you were shutting me out. I made a terrible mistake. But please, don't throw away our marriage over this. He spun around, eyes blazing. Our marriage? Portia, that died the moment you lied to me. The moment you looked me in the eye every day, knowing you were carrying another man's child. Portia clutched her stomach protectively, instinctively. I was going to tell you, she whispered. I just needed time. Time? Curtis echoed bitterly. How much time, Portia? Until the baby was born? Until I figured it out on my own, like last time? His voice grew louder with every word, his pain turning into rage. You lied to me about Trina's paternity once. You swore you'd never lie to me again. And here we are, right back in the same place. Portia's tears fell harder now. Don't bring up the past, Curtis. This isn't the same. It's exactly the same, he snapped. You keep secrets. You play with people's lives. And every time, you expect forgiveness. He exhaled sharply, pacing the room. You know what hurts the most? I still believed you'd changed. That you were done lying. She took a trembling step forward. I have changed. Curtis, please, I'm begging you, don't walk away from us. He looked at her for a long moment, the war in his eyes clear. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to hold on. But the betrayal cut too deep this time. I can't, he said quietly. Every time I look at you now, I'll see him. I'll see Isaiah. Her heart shattered. It's over, then? She asked through sobs. Curtis hesitated. He walked closer, his expression softening for a fleeting second. Portia, I wish I could forgive you. I wish love was enough to fix this. But you've taken something from me I can never get back. He swallowed hard. Trust. Portia shook her head violently. Don't do this, Curtis. We can get through this. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, honesty, anything. Please, just don't give up on me. He turned away, his voice barely above a whisper. I already did. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the quiet ticking of the clock and Portia's soft sobs. The reality of what had just happened settled between them like ashes after a fire. The love that once burned so brightly had turned into something cold and heavy. After several minutes, Portia wiped her eyes, trying to steady her voice. Does Isaiah know? Curtis's jaw tightened. Not yet. But he will. Her eyes widened. You can't tell him. Please, not yet. Let me figure out how. Curtis cut her off again. He deserves to know he's going to be a father. You've kept enough secrets, Portia. I won't help you lie anymore. She closed her eyes in anguish. You're angry. I understand. But please, don't make this worse. He laughed bitterly. Worse? You think this can get worse? He looked at her like she was a stranger. You just destroyed everything we had left to protect, and you're worried about damage control? Portia's voice cracked. I'm worried about my family. About Trina, about this baby. Don't, Curtis interrupted harshly. Don't use Trina to justify this. She's the only good thing that's ever come from all your lies. That hit her like a slap. She covered her mouth again, sobbing. You're cruel. I'm honest, he replied coldly. Something you should try for once. The silence that followed was suffocating. Portia turned away, clutching her stomach, feeling the baby inside her move. For a brief moment, she thought about the future, the one she imagined with Curtis, and realized it was gone. Curtis finally exhaled, rubbing his temples. His voice softened, exhaustion replacing the anger. I loved you, Portia. More than anyone. I thought we could survive anything. But this, he shook his head. This broke me. Portia looked at him, her face streaked with tears. Then what happens now? He sighed. Now, I figure out how to live with what's left. And you figure out how to raise Isaiah's child without destroying what's left of your soul. Those words gutted her. She fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably as Curtis walked toward the door. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, hesitating for just a second. For a moment, he looked back at her, the love still there beneath all the pain. But it wasn't enough. Not this time. Without another word, he walked out, leaving her alone with her guilt and her unborn child. When the door closed, Portia pressed her hand to her belly, whispering through tears. I'm so sorry. She knew those words would never undo what she had done. Outside, Curtis stood in the hallway, trying to breathe. His heart felt like it had been ripped from his chest. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he reached one name, Trina. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he couldn't do it. Not yet. How could he tell his daughter that her mother had once again blown their world apart? He slipped the phone back into his pocket, whispering to himself, you killed what we had left. Meanwhile, across town, Isaiah was standing at the hospital, unaware that his world was about to change too. When the truth finally reached him that Portia was pregnant with his child, it would ignite a storm that would ripple through every corner of Port Charles. And as Curtis drove away from the Metro Court, his reflection staring back at him in the rearview mirror, one thing was clear, this betrayal would leave scars none of them could ever heal. But in the quiet darkness of his car, Curtis couldn't help but feel the faint sting of love still buried beneath the wreckage. No matter how much he wanted to hate her, a part of him always would love Portia. That, perhaps, was the cruelest truth of all.